So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Ed Miliband. He released a new book called Go Big, and so he's made some not great statements about Brexit, talking about accepting and embracing it, stuff like that. But he's made some really good kind of points about the fact that his analysis was good, but his solutions weren't great, and that's one of the reasons why he was rejected at the 2015 election. And he does make the point that look, it's not to say that had he been more radical, he would have won. By say that he should have offered more, and maybe he wanted to push the Overton window, which has moved dramatically now. When you look at the Tories and the fact that the Conservatives have jacked some of the left wing framing on things like workers' rights, where instead of they talk about upgrading, the rights of workers, things like that, they just blame immigrants on causing wage shortages, etc. So I found this really interesting. I like Ed. I think he's all right. I do think that his kind of policy proposals in 2016 were really rubbish. When he talked about lowering tuition fees from £9,000 to £6,000, like you should just stayed in bed, mate. To be honest, at that point. But if we look at some of the things that were said, Go Big is not a memoir, but it does hint at a personal journey. Does the prescription contained in the book's title imply, as Labour leader, he went too small? Which I think he does. He will accept that he was not bold enough as Labour leader. And he even says it here. He goes, I wasn't bold enough. Miliband answers my question without hesitation. I was bold in my analysis, but I felt at the time that I wasn't bold in my solutions. And since then, I felt that the prescriptions didn't meet the analysis. He recalls giving a waffly answer when one interviewer asked if his election manifesto matched the ambition of a Margaret Thatcher or a Clement Attlee. He said, I used to console myself with the thought that, well, you're in opposition, there's only so much you can do. But the point being is that when you're leader of the opposition, you're meant to be the Prime Minister in waiting. So you are meant to talk about the things that you can do rather than talking about, oh, well, if I was Prime Minister, I wouldn't do this. That's what Starmer is doing wrong, in my opinion. Go Big was born of the post-defeat decision not to settle for any kind of consolation. Miliband describes it as a call to rediscover our agency when faced with huge, seemingly intractable problems: inequality, insecurity in work, climate emergency, the unravelling of the social contract. So these are really good points here that he has talked about the fact that we do need to fight against rising inequality, rising insecurity, the climate emergency, and the fact that the social contract is being violated, that people pay taxes, and the government should be able to protect its citizens but also look after them, and the government has failed to do that. People often feel powerless for totally understandable reasons. If you're on the progressive side of politics, you see a Tory government in power, you think, I want a Labour government, but what am I going to do in the meantime? There are other points of entry to power, and he talks about, grassroots organisation and things like that, but the simple fact is, Keir Starmer, I think, has gotten rid of a lot of the grassroots organising. So, you need to have a word in your boy's ear, Ed Miliband, because, what you're saying and what I'm seeing from the Labour Party isn't great. Miliband started the book as a backbencher, not anticipating to return to the front bench. He likes to quote Barack Obama, what's troubling is not the magnitude of our problem, but the smallness of our politics. But the thing is, Barack Obama was defined by the smallness of his politics and his lack of decision making. So I don't like the fact that certain Labour people are citing Barack Obama and Joe Biden because they haven't done that great a job. Yes, they are better than Donald Trump, George W. Bush, but that's a very low bar. And the whole point of this is to, not accept half measures. So Barack Obama, a half measure. Joe Biden, a half measure. The book certainly looks across a broad horizon of covering social, economic and political reform. Each theme is extrapolated from a real-world case study, which is important because he's not just talking about theory, he's giving actual examples, demonstrating that committed individuals and groups can achieve lasting, positive change. Common ingredients are imagination, building up from a small base, and an absence of caution when it comes to defying a prevailing consensus is to go against, the prevailing consensus, say Thatcherism, Reaganism, or, Borisism, or whatever the hell he is now. It's important to go against the narrative. The narrative sweeps across the world. A woman strike for equality in Iceland, American campaigns against poverty wages, Viennese social housing, emergency flood response in Doncaster. The tone is energetic, eager, but also quite specific on policy details. And sorry, my voice just went a bit there. But point being is that we do need a rainbow coalition. When it comes to, say in this country, if we had, fast food workers campaigning for a high minimum wage, we should all back them. Even if it's not our cause, even if you have to pay a bit more for fast food, we should still back them because because we need to help each other. That's the only way we'll get social change in this country or in any country. You have to help each other. even if it's not your cause, or even if it will impact you slightly negatively. This is the point. We have to help back each other. That's why you need a rainbow coalition of people to work with each other in order to help each other. That's enough mushy stuff there, but Ed Miliband comes across more relaxed, more comfortable in his skin than he did as leader. He looked very awkward as leader, very Theresa May-like in a lot of ways, especially when he had, I'm not going to go into the sandwich thing, but when political caution sometimes seemed to stuff his mouth with cotton wool, that's a good description of what it was like, he replied when I offered the metaphor. And he was contained himself with trying to be kind of a bridge between New Labour and kind of that more kind of radical, those more radical left-wing ideas. And he wasn't that, it wasn't enough. He couldn't build that kind of coalition. And that was another problem Ed Miliband faced. He talks about the system that was rigged in ways that obstructed social mobility, stripped away security and fomented frustration, but he never actually offered any solutions to deal with that stuff. Some of that analysis and that accompanying recognition that the state has to be much more robust in fixing the problem informed May's 2017 manifesto, some stuff she was never going to implement, but she spoke about these things because she wanted to appear more of a populist than she was. She raided Labour's idea of having workers represented on company boards. That never happened because she lacked the courage and political bandwidth to go through with it. But the thing is, she was never intending to actually do that, but she used that rhetoric in order to try and pry away voters from Labour. And that's something where Labour has to say that, well, you've promised these policies in the past to help workers, you've never done them, so you guys are frauds. We'll actually do them, and point to the things that Labour have actually done in the past to help workers. Implementing things like a minimum wage. The Conservative Party were against that. Start talking like that, instead of saying that, oh, well, the Conservatives have nicked our ideas again. Make the point that they don't actually implement these things. As part of its levelling up agenda, the current government is considering punitive taxes to prevent land banking, the practice of developers sitting on vacant real estate and watching its value soar without creating new homes, which is something, it's a massive problem. When Ed Miliband proposed to use it or lose it in crackdown on the same thing 8 years ago, Boris Johnson denounced it in the Daily Telegraph as Mugabe-style expropriations. And that's a problem that the Labour Party does face, where they are maligned for putting up certain policies, but that's where Labour have to be stronger and say, look, these landowners that have purchased the land are going to make a ton of money just sitting on it and not doing what they promised to do. So these aren't about land grabs. These are about setting the rules about the purchasing of land to build houses. That's how you do it. So you don't have to take the land back in the first place. You just make the rule that they have to do this land grab, or they're going to you make the rule that they have to build the housing, or they're going to face a tax. That's what they should be doing. Ideological plasticity is why the Conservatives have a historical record as one of the world's most formidable election-winning machines, which is true. That the fact that they can change and kind of comedians in a way, is a problem. They are very good at focus grouping and all this stuff, but the fact is Labour have to be better. They have to be better at appealing to people. This is the problem. The sound of true believers chanting Jeremy Corbyn's name may have lifted the roof in auditoriums, but it did not carry Labour into government, which is true. And one of the problems Labour faced was, problems with kind of the new Labour wing, sort of centre right of the party, people like Jess Phillips, who said, I won't stab him in the back, I'll stab him in the front. I think Lisa and Andy said, we're going to break him. Well, Corbyn's out of the party now, for the most part. What have you guys offered? Zero. Miliband counters that activism properly deployed in the community can persuade people Labour is on their side, and that's important, that Labour does need political activism. It's not enough to win, you do need a lot more than that, but you need to start talking to people, convincing them to register to vote and things like that, and using Labour councils to really help people's lives. That's what the Labour Party should be looking at doing. When you help someone out, it increases the chance of them voting for you. If we're community activists, it re-engages people. Politics has to be about what you are doing with people in their communities, not just about what the leader is saying on telly. And that's a phenomenal point. His analysis has always been good, that it's about engaging people in the community. How are you going to improve my life? What are you going to do when you get in there? My kids can't get a school place. How are you going to solve that? These are the things that the Labour Party need to do. The book, he says, is not meant as a campaign blueprint, but as a reservoir of evidence that effective routes to change are available. And it's important to stress that he did write this. He did start this book as a backbencher, but now, as a frontbencher, he has to get in Starmer's ear and he has to start saying, look, you need to be bold. Look at all these examples where people have pushed for societal change and achieved it and how they did it. That's what the Labour Party have to do now. I'm not going to pretend this is an electoral strategy for Labour, but I am raising ideas to change the country, trying to lift eyes from the smallness of politics. That's important, but I'm not saying be so broad and nebulous, but you can give people specifics about how you're going to achieve certain aims, how you're going to recruit, an X amount of police officers. What specifically are you going to do to recruit more teachers or more nurses, etc.? That's what the Labour Party should be doing. Funding the NHS properly is a bold statement, but how specifically are you going to do that so it looks more believable to people? He's confident there will be a chance for Labour when the Tories fail to deliver on their promises. I mean, they've been failing for 11 years, buddy. What you'll see is a gap opening between their rhetoric and their reality. That's already happened, my friend. These, northern powerhouses they've been talking about for years haven't happened. The improvements to this country haven't happened. If anything, things have gotten worse. They say you don't want insecure jobs and all that, but they don't really do anything about it. Well, what are the Labour Party going to do about it? That's the problem, Ed. They say they want a green revolution, but they don't believe in the role of the state to make that revolution happen. So what are the Labour Party going to do? This is the issue I'm having with kind of when the Labour Party criticise the Tories, they don't have anything. There's no actual policy proposals. That's the problem. It may be true that Johnson's shape-shifting act lacks intellectual coherence and depth, but if levelling up doesn't work, surely the Tories will try other devices to shore up electoral gains. But again, that's the thing where Labour needs to start now and start countering this narrative now, rather than waiting for the Conservatives to come up with their next move. Start hitting them now. The Tories will compensate for failures to deliver on the economic front by stoking culture war resentments. But the thing is, your point you need to make is, engaging in these attacks on immigrants or whatever, that's not going to pay the bills for people. That's what the Labour Party should be pushing on, focusing their intent on the economics. The culture war stuff you can engage in on occasion, but you're going into their world at that point, and that's where you're going to have problems. There is a consensus across Labour on the need for big economic change. That is the right thing for the country, and where the mainstream and vast majority of the party is. I don't think the vast majority of the party are there because you don't have actual policies on big economic change. You don't have it. Corbyn had it. Yes, he was rejected. He was very unpopular. Corbyn, as a man, was very unpopular. His ideas weren't as unpopular as him, so that gives you some leeway to take some of his policies and implement them. Andrew Breitbart, a propagandist for the US alt-right, I think he's dead now, said politics is downstream of culture. So politics, he's saying, is a part of culture, which is true. That's the reason why the Conservative Party do so well in culture war stuff, because that culture war is a part of Britain. The old empire and all that narrative and hating immigrants, that is a part of Britain. You can't deny that. You can argue, is it how big a part of Britain is it? That's fine, but it is still a part of Britain. And that's a problem with the Labour Party face, but they can't engage, in that narrative of hating immigrants, because then you're going to lose a lot of voters. Trust me on that, you will lose a lot of voters. I grew up, this is Ed Miliband saying he grew up in an era where the Berlin Wall went up and apartheid was going strong. Is Ed Miliband that old? No, he can't be that old. When the Berlin Wall was put up, and apartheid was going strong. He said, why didn't I just go off and become... So he's saying, these things happened. Apartheid was going on, the Berlin Wall was up, and these things were taken apart. But it took a massive amount of international effort for these things to happen. Ed Miliband says, why didn't I just go off and become an academic? I mean, my dad was an academic. There's a lot of great academics. There are a lot of great academics out there doing really important things. I'm a politician who has always been interested in ideas, but I want to make social change happen in this country, which is great. I respect him for that. Main problem is that, look, he had crappy advisors in 2016. He kind of denies it, but he did. It's kind of his fault because he picked his advisors. But at the end of the day, now is his chance. Who won't be leader of the Labour Party again, but now's his chance to really make a difference with Keir Starmer and push Keir Starmer to push for bigger changes in the country, and not this kind of small politics that he's pushing, which he has no actual proposals for anything. Except from the burning injustices. So this is an interview Ed Miliband did with Owen Jones, which is great. Ed, I'll interview you if you want. You don't even have to send me a copy of your book. I've got loads of questions for you, pal. If we watch this part where they talk about what is the Labour Party's policies now, let's just watch this because it's pretty funny, to be honest.
Fucking neighbour Labour leader who lacked less vision. Don't include Ramsay MacDonald.
Less vision than obviously Keir Starmer. So this is Ed Miliband kind of wilts here a lot, because this is the situation Keir Starmer's putting any of the Labour MPs in, which is, okay, what are your policies? How are you going to change things? And they're like, well, you see, the sun's currently in our eyes, and we will discuss this at a later date, which is a problem because people want to know now. So let's go.
What's the okay? Let me ask you this, and don't, by the way, on social media, do not mock Ed.
Headphones died for a second there.
this because this is not his fault. What is Labour's vision? Sum it up.
I think Labour's vision. Look, Keir is on Keir Starmer is on my book. Labour's vision, I believe, is about the fairer, more equal society, the sustainable society that we need, and it is about transforming this country and the deep inequalities we face. That is absolutely our vision. And look, Keir has faced a uniquely difficult set of circumstances as Labour leader. I mean, I think he's spoken to an audience for the first time in his 14 months as Labour leader.
Bro, the internet exists. I've never spoken in front of an audience. But, you don't have to speak in front of people. Like, you have the internet, you have Twitter. Like, you can use those to push policy proposals. He has, he can go on any news show as leader of the opposition and they'll give him time. So this argument Ed Miliband's making here is really bad.
In the last sort of 2 weeks, he's come into the pandemic, he's provided opposition, held the government to account, but in a time of national crisis. He himself has said that at the core of his vision is transforming our economy, transforming the economy we have into the one that we need and that tackles the deep inequalities of our society. And look, as you might expect me to say, Owen, leadership is a collective enterprise, right? And it's on me, it's on other members of the shadow cabinet, it's on all of us to show that vision.
Only you can help the Labour Party win. That's basically what he's saying. Only you can stop forest fires. Come on, Ed.
That's what I'm trying to do, contribute ideas with this book. I hope it helps the debate, not just on some of the issues that we've talked about, on gender equality, father's leave. There's so much to fight for in our country.
So on the pandemic, without getting bogged down in it, but, look, Dominic Cummings, not someone obviously who we should be extolling the integrity of, but it was a confession as well as whistleblowing that he did, exposed a catastrophic failure on the part of the government throughout the pandemic, which I do think Labour has terribly failed to hold the government to account, leaving people to conclude, well, the government messed up, but Labour wouldn't have done any better. So that's led to resignation.
I mean, it's led to people saying Labour would have done worse somehow. I don't understand how people come to that conclusion, but, Starmer's shoddy opposition is one of the problems that have led to that conclusion, as, Owen Jones points out.
But I suppose, okay, here's a concrete question, I suppose. I'm interested in what you think about this. Keir Starmer made 10 pledges during the leadership contest. And it's very different. The reason I bring this up is honesty in politics is really, it's hard for a politician to gain honesty as a trait which is accepted, but very easy to lose and never get back. So he made a promise, 10 pledges, increase taxes on the rich, corporation tax, scrap tuition fees, green industrial revolution.
He said scrap tuition fees, I didn't even know that. Wow.
Made a series of commitments. Is the leadership still committed to that, do you think?
Yeah, I think we are, but of course you've got to adapt your manifesto in light of circumstances. But you mentioned the Green Industrial Revolution, right? We've been leading the fight that says we need a proper green stimulus in this country. In my area, we need a 30 billion green stimulus, at least a 30 billion green stimulus over the next over the following 18 months, the coming 18 months.
So is that a Labour Party policy then? Green stimulus? You're talking £30 billion into your area. Is that what you're saying right now? Is this a Labour Party policy? Because you said you need it. Is that going to happen, Ed?
To create the green jobs that we need in our society. But the thing I'd say, Owen, is the sort of bigger picture of this is this, which is, look, I was the leader. Painful. I know it's a hard job, right? Being leader of the Labour Party. You get all kinds of advice. You've got to be yourself. I mean, you've got to be yourself. And
so, what is yourself? When you talk about Starmer, what is himself like? Who is he? What does he stand for? I have no idea. I don't know, bruv. Tell me, what does Starmer stand for? Because I don't know, bruv.
Go out and argue for what you believe in. And I think we've been in an exceptional period in the last year or more. And we have of course, I recognise that we all have a collective obligation to be bold, to show the boldness that I think the moment demands, and judge. You've got to judge Keir and the rest of us on this, on what follows because of this, because we have been in this exceptional period.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, you've done very well there, I have to say, given the material that you have from the Labour leadership, which is not very good. But I mean, I heard the other day one of your colleagues say, "Oh, we would set out a vision, but the pandemic got in the way." That's not what Clement Attlee said during World War II. He didn't go, "Oh, guys, you know what? We'd really like to set out this ambitious vision for the country, but there's this bloody war going on." They said, the war shows that we need to be ambitious. When we win the war, we got to win the peace.
I completely agree.
You agree, bro? So he can't call out his leader, but like, dude, like there were bombs and stuff flying. Clement Attlee was still talking to people. He was still putting out policy ideas in a war. Like Britain was being bombed. Ed, like, come on, man. In a war, the biggest war I think this country's ever faced.
Completely agree that the precedent of 1940, no two periods are the same, and the pandemic's obviously different from World War II. But I think at the kernel of the idea, well, for me, what does the pandemic show? It shows who has power and who doesn't in our country. The power to work from home, the power not to work from home. Who gets paid properly? The key workers. So many of our key workers in social care, for example, childcare. Doing some of the most important jobs in our country, paid the least, the most insecure. That's got to change. Our underfunded public services, and if you're asking me, and a whole host of other things too, and if the need for green spaces, build back better in terms of green. If you're saying
don't use the phrase "build back better," please stop it. Stop using that phrase.
Is that at the core of Labour's vision, as far as I'm concerned? Absolutely, it's at the core.
Okay, so more green spaces, looking at who has power and who doesn't have power, things like that. That's at the core of Labour. But what are you going to do about these things? Are you just going to talk about them? Because it's not going to help anyone, is it?
Of Labour's vision, and look, I wouldn't have written this book. I wouldn't be part of the shadow cabinet if I didn't think it was part of Keir's vision as well. As I say, I think you've got to watch this space, and I accept the challenge, which is we've got to show the kind of society we would create, and the next election is going to be a change election, and
every election is a change election by definition. That's the whole point of an election, Ed.
Johnson's going to be claiming he offers change, and we've got to offer a bigger, better, bolder version of change.
So what's your bigger, better, bolder version of change then? What is this vision for Starmer? Because I feel bad. Oh, this freeze frame's really bad. I'm sorry.
I'm absolutely
okay. That's better. What are you going to offer then? Because obviously Ed Miliband's going to be in Starmer's ear talking about bolder policy positions. But why hasn't Starmer offered anything? Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Apart from he wants to give nurses, a 2.1% pay rise instead of a 1% pay rise. Like, yeah, that's really bold and radical, Ed. That's really going big.
You committed to that, and I know Keir is too.
Well, we'll see. And I will watch this space, which is currently a big empty space, a void even. Anyway, that's me.
Okay, yeah. So that's a lot of people dislike Owen Jones, and he's not my favourite person in the world. Not gonna lie, and probably, but he does a decent interview here, like a really good interview, holding Ed Miliband accountable far better than a lot of other journalists would have done, especially left wing ones. But point being is that Labour have no actual policies, and that's a big problem here. And I hope that Ed Miliband's in the room when they come up with policy proposals and really pushes Starmer. But that's just a hope. He is on a book tour, so he's going to say a couple of outrageous things because he's trying to promote his book. But Ed, if you want to give someone a free copy to review, you can send it to me, and I'll do a review if you want, Ed. I'm your boy, and maybe I'll do nicer videos you in the future. Definitely won't. But look, anyways, this has been a long video. I know it's gone. I've probably used too much for the clip anyways. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.